is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. It's Friday Eve, y'all, which means we're one step closer to the weekend. And I'm one step closer to exclusively wearing bottoms with a drawstring. But we're not there yet, as far as you know. Here's what we got for y'all in today's show. In this episode, we're heading to Scotland to ask, why Glasgow? As world leaders hash out new plans to counter climate change at COP26. Then, as Congress struggles to get on the same page with immigration reform, millions of people are left in limbo. We get a firsthand look at one woman's years-long path to try and get permanent citizenship. But first, the US military held its annual Association of the US Army, or AUSA, exposition in October, right here in Washington, D.C. It's a time for the defense industry to show off all sorts of new gadgets from the military. This year, it was more clear than ever that weaponized robots are truly becoming a thing in our military. Remember those robo-dogs that Boston Dynamics would make videos of, showing them doing klutzy things like trying to dance? Well, another company, Ghost Robotics, decided to build something similar, except this one has a gun mounted on top of it. We are inching closer to the reality of being killed by a robot and then having it do the twist on our graves. To be clear, this doesn't involve Boston Dynamics. They have a pretty strict rule against using their robots for violence. While this was essentially a demo-type situation, the Ghost Robotics dog, called Spur, or Special Purpose Unmanned Rifle, is just the latest example of a trend in warfare that has seen more and more robotic technology being introduced, and that has some experts worried.
One of the biggest arguments for putting autonomy, and this is also one of the big arguments for on the loop when that gets brought up, is you want to have a machine that can fire fast enough to matter.
This is Kelsey D. Atherton, who authors Wars of Future Past on Substack. Kelsey has been covering these types of weapons for years.
The scariest possible scenario is you hook up an automatic targeting system to a nuclear early warning system.
The main issue here is the ethics of introducing these kinds of weapons into a country's military. The United States definitely isn't the only one working on these things.
And part of this is, right, the laws of war exist because war is complicated and messy, but nations wanted to adhere to some binding standards so that you could have a distinction of a war crime and just stuff that happens in war. With a robot, it's messier. It's a lot messier because you do not know if what is making the decision is the commander who ordered the robot in place.
Now, there are a few different ways these autonomous weapon systems can work in a military environment. Human control can essentially be boiled down to three different interactions, what experts call in-loop, on-loop, and out of loop. And no, this show had nothing to do with the naming of these systems, as far as I know. In loop is what we see in advanced weapon systems right now. That is, there's a human controlling a robot like an armed drone, and the human makes the decision on whether to pull the trigger on a target. This leaves the ethics concerns in the hands of the human, which, while not perfect, is still better than letting an AI decide. On-loop takes it one step further. This is where the autonomous weapon system can seek out targets using AI, and a human operator is on hand just in case they need to stop the system from pulling the trigger. There aren't a ton of these kinds of systems out there right now, but they're starting to catch on. Loitering munitions, which hover in the air and then dive bomb their targets, are one example of this type of system. These can work in a sort of on-loop way, where the drone is sent up and then would lock onto signals being emitted from military equipment. The last and most worrisome in action is out of loop. This is where there's no human behind the screen who's able to select targets or abort strikes. This is really only hypothetical right now, since no one is actually letting an AI fully control a weapon on the battlefield. But we're inching closer to this kind of technology every day, and it's stuff like robo-dogs with rifles mounted on their backs that show it.
Ghost Robotics is very clear that this is a remotely piloted robot dog that uses autonomy mainly for balancing and for obstacle avoidance. And that's where you put the autonomy in the system right now, and you still have a human who is not just in control of what it might see, but also in control of if it moves forward, if it moves back. Like, they are really piloting it like a great big RC car. If this is a lot of hair splitting, that's where the industry is at, and where the military is at. They're very keen on saying, we're not doing the thing you're afraid of, we're doing this other thing which is steps 1 through 3 of a 10-step process to get to the thing you're afraid of.
When it comes to taking a life, computer AI simply isn't advanced enough to take in the kind of variables that a human would be able to take in before pulling the trigger. The fact that other major powers, Russia and China to name two, are developing autonomous weapon systems creates a sort of arms race between the world's great powers.
We are in an era of sort of parallel arms development. Arms development obviously doesn't happen in a vacuum. Countries are developing things, especially now aware of what other countries are working on. They have ideas, they have concepts. The US publishes doctrine, other countries do as well. They also have doctrine that they don't publish and ideas that they don't publish and concepts out there. So there's this understanding that everyone is sort of building towards these things. But the reason I would be hesitant to call it outright an arms race is we don't know what the winning strategy is yet.
Our partners at the Washington Post video team dug into this to show some examples of autonomous weapons already in use on the battlefield.
Artificial intelligence-controlled weapons have been a fixture of science fiction for so long that they've become a cliché.
I'll be back.
But autonomous weapons are far from imaginary. Systems that can pick and attack targets on their own are already being deployed in the conflicts of today. In 2020, small drones that have the ability to choose their own targets and dive bomb them attacked retreating fighters and supply vehicles of Russian-backed militias fighting the Libyan government. A 2021 United Nations panel reported autonomous drones like Turkey's Kargu 2 hunted down and remotely engaged the rebels. These loitering munitions are a growing part of autonomous systems used in skirmishes around the world. They can fly high above a battlefield, swooping in and hitting targets they identify on their own or at the command of a human. In 2020, Azerbaijan used drones purchased from Israel and Turkey to devastate Armenia's army, ending a 6-week war and gaining vast amounts of territory. And drones are just one facet of AI's growing influence in advanced weaponry. From sentry turrets designed by a Samsung subsidiary deployed by South Korea on the demilitarized zone, to Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system that knocks down Hamas's rockets, decision-making processes have already been handed to autonomous weapons in a variety of ways. Both South Korea and Israel say the weapon systems are controlled by humans, but they're capable of operating on their own. Still, experts disagree on what is the right amount of human involvement. The Defense Department's 2012 guidelines for autonomous weapons require these systems to allow commanders and operators to exercise appropriate levels of human judgment. But without humans in the loop, skeptics say autonomous weapons could make decisions that clash with human ethics and the laws of war.
These systems aren't really capable at this point of distinguishing civilian and military targets, which is a basic requirement of international humanitarian law. It becomes much too easy to, create atrocities or war crimes where nobody could be really held accountable, or states couldn't necessarily be held accountable for the actions taken by the machines they deploy.
AI systems might even come into conflict with each other, escalating a fight to a point of no return before humans even know what's happening.
We're really going to be at a disadvantage if we think we're going to be in a pure human against machine. It'll be human and machine on one side, human and machine on the others, but the temporal dimension, this fleeting superiority that you may be facing, where decisions will be made that fast, it might be algorithm against algorithm.
The use of AI in weapons has found support in tech luminaries like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt and Amazon CEO Andy Jassy.
And we strongly believe that our nation needs to be AI ready by 2025 to defend and compete in the coming era of AI accelerated competition and conflict.
In a 756-page report on artificial intelligence and national security commissioned by Congress, they argue the U.S. should push back against a ban, saying it would be difficult to enforce and could restrict current military capabilities. Other countries, and even some American allies like Austria and Mexico, are pushing back against the use of AI weapons, regardless of whether the US, Russia, and China object. But an outright ban is unlikely for now. America is the world's most powerful country and a nuclear superpower. It wants to operate unfettered with a dominant arsenal, so it continues to maintain it will make its own rules. That goes for other major military powers like China and Russia too, who are moving swiftly ahead with their own robotic and AI weapons. AI technology will only advance from here, and the pace of development is speeding up. Whether we like it or not, it's almost certain to have a greater role on future battlefields.
A big thanks to the Washington Post for their in-depth reporting. After the break, we're talking about COP26. World leaders have met in Glasgow, Scotland this week for the UN's annual climate conference. But how exactly did Glasgow score the hosting gig? We'll take a look at that next. Welcome back to In the Loop. World leaders have gathered in Glasgow, Scotland for COP26, the UN's 26th climate change conference. In the first few days of the conference, countries have already reached major agreements. Over 100 countries agreed to end deforestation by 2030, including China, the US, and Brazil. And 40 countries committed to shift away from relying on coal. The US did not sign that one, but did agree to end public funding for, quote, unabated fossil fuel projects abroad. But countries still haven't reached a larger agreement on how to reduce emissions in a big way to avoid the worst effects of climate change. The hosts have pressured countries to act quickly. Queen Elizabeth taped a message for the start of the conference, urging leaders to come to an agreement there. Which raises an interesting question. Why are all these world leaders meeting in the UK, specifically Scotland? Chris Jones has more on how Glasgow was picked.
COP26 is an opportunity for world leaders to come up with solutions to the Earth's climate crisis. The Earth's temperature is rising at a rate that will become irreversible unless bold action is taken. Sam Alvis is head of Green Economy for Green Alliance, a UK-based environmental think tank. He says the UK's ambitious carbon emissions targets make it a suitable host for the summit.
The UK has really been at the forefront of decarbonisation and climate action. We were one of the first countries to have a legally binding target to reach net zero.
But why Glasgow? To begin with, it has a world-class events facility. Delegates from well over 100 countries have gathered here at Glasgow's Scottish Events Centre just on the River Clyde. It can hold thousands of people, allowing experts the space to communicate the ideas for a carbon-free future. But it's not just that. Many of the city's citizens and businesses are dedicated to fighting climate change. This is one of Glasgow's many zero-waste stores, and it's dedicated to rebuilding the food retail industry. To do that, Locavore, a company with numerous shops like this, asks its customers to bring their own containers to minimise plastic waste. It also only invests in local produce, avoiding big, potentially climate-damaging corporations. All of its produce is organic and ethically sourced. And importantly, it's proved popular with the locals, says the store's manager.
We want just people to be really aware and conscious of where their food's coming from, the quality of that food, what's going into it and how it affects them and where their money's going.
Innovative ideas like zero-waste stores have helped the city cut its carbon emissions by 41% between 2009 and 2019. And the head of sustainability at Glasgow City Council, Gavin Slater, says this summit is an opportunity to show off the ambitious city as it aims to become carbon neutral by 2030.
We've got great ambition, as you state, but we've also got great character. It's a wonderful city, and we've got every opportunity to show the world that now. And the endeavour that comes from Glasgow, the innovation, the expertise, it's been there, right from the start of the Industrial Revolution, and now this new revolution towards a net zero carbon future.
It's vital that world leaders come up with solutions in Glasgow and take action. If not, experts say time will run out to save the Earth. For Newsy, I'm Chris Jones in Glasgow.
Many thanks to Chris for that reporting. One of the many speakers at COP26 this week was U.S. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American person to serve in that role. And that's important here. Her remarks at the conference are notable because of the intersection of American energy production and tribal land. While some tribal nations have been vocal about their opposition to using fossil fuels, there are around a dozen that benefit from their oil and gas reserves. In the past, Holland has opposed the fossil fuel industry while supporting the expansion of environmental protection on public lands. But as an Interior Secretary nominee, she told lawmakers she was committed to striking the right balance between utilizing fossil energy and fighting climate change. Here to tell us more about Holland's plan to involve Indigenous communities when it comes to cutting carbon emissions and fighting climate change is Newsy national correspondent Allison Herrera. Allison, what things did Holland say to reporters about the Interior Department's plan to address climate change and strike that balance, as she said before?
The press conference with reporters today was with U.S. journalists that were in Glasgow for COP26, and some of us, like myself, joined by phone. And it was with the Interior leadership team, including, of course, Secretary of Interior Holland and Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs Brian Newland, who is himself a tribal citizen. It's important to note here that Indigenous people comprise less than 5% of the world's population, but we protect 80% of the world's global biodiversity. One of the things that Assistant Secretary Brian Newland said is that they promote Indian self-determination. In other words, they promote tribes making the best decision for themselves to produce oil and gas in a way that is, economically feasible for them, and also develop a plan around protecting the environment. One other thing that Assistant Secretary Newland said was that Indigenous people have spent a millennia learning how to use nature-based approaches to coexist among our wildlife and habitat. And they really want to make a commitment to emphasizing and incorporating some of these Indigenous teachings when it comes to climate change, like, for example, fire mitigation. And they also just talked about how disproportionately Indigenous communities are being impacted by climate change.
Much appreciated, Allison. The murder of George Floyd last spring sparked protests, reflection, and cultural reckoning. After a quick break, we'll have more about the role art has played in the expression of the Black Lives Matter movement. Stay with us. The Black Lives Matter movement has been around for years, but things really popped off in the summer of 2020 following the murder of George Floyd. Protests under the Black Lives Matter banner took place around the country and around the world. During this time, a lot of Black artists came together to paint murals and street art in honor of those unjustly killed. There was also a push for Black artists to showcase other pieces of their artwork in museums and in other spaces. When asked what the motivation is for displaying this art, a lot of these artists say it's for the kids. They want to inspire children and uplift their communities. Newsy's Amber Strong takes us to Indianapolis and shows us what these artists are up to now and explains the work that still needs to be done.
A single act of destruction,
symbol of peace and unity, tagged by vandals, and
has led to a celebration of Black art.
They may not have planned it, but they added to our story.
In the summer of 2020, 18 artists came together to paint the words Black Lives Matter in downtown Indianapolis.
It was a statement for all Black and brown children across the world that their futures matter.
Nearly a week later, the words were doused with white paint. Fast forward to 2021.
I'm happy with it, happy, just about it and everything.
An embrace of the movement and the individual artists who brought it to life.
It's been a blessing. I've been able to take care of myself, take care of my family, and, I'm growing. I'm growing as an artist.
At the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, a reproduction of the street mural, plus additional pieces from the artists like Lemonade Stand, Soaring Possibilities, and Giants.
Youth are at the forefront of everything that we do. We've seen eyes sparkling, questions being asked, careers being declared of wanting to be an artist or an entrepreneur.
But the work of the so-called 18 has traveled beyond the walls of the museum.
From Japanese-inspired art in the northern suburbs to the keepers of culture in downtown Indy, it's almost like the state has become their canvas.
I wanted to be a muralist. I want to create work not just that CEOs could experience, but create work that even our homeless neighbors could experience.
During last summer's racial justice protests, corporate America and many of the country's museums made a promise to support Black Americans. The Children's Museum curators tell Newsy presenting the topic to young audiences was important.
We knew it was the message that needed to be, spread. We knew that there were a lot of questions around it, and we want to create a space where families can come and get questions answered.
But responding to the nation's outcry has been tricky for museums. The Art Institute of Chicago is accused of firing its older white volunteers to make room for more diverse candidates. The Indianapolis Museum of Art came under fire after a job posting indicated a desire to add diversity while maintaining its traditional core white audience. Both museums have denied any ill intent. We reached out to 5 of the major art museums that issued statements of support in 2020 to see what percentage of their current collection is from Black artists and if that's changed from last year. 2 responded to the question. A spokesperson for the Guggenheim in New York told us, quote, prioritizing the presentation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color was fundamental to recent exhibitions, and that the expansion and diversification of their collection is an ongoing priority, pointing to several new pieces. The National Gallery of Art says it's hard to determine how many pieces are from Black artists. Of the pieces they can confirm, less than 1% today are from Black artists. Still, it's actually an increase from where that figure stood in 2019. Alan Bacon and Molly Simone Jeffers are curators and founders of Gang Gang. They're part of the team that brought the 18 artists together. Their mission now is to create spaces for Black artists to thrive.
Much of what we do is kind of joy-based, love-based, programming-based, because we think that that's the sustainable path toward actually ending racism. It's not only, cultural sensitivity trainings and very solemn rooms where we come together and have very serious conversations. Those are important, but we also need bright, sustainable, and fun paths that bring people together.
Their hope, elevating the conversation from the nation's current focus on Black art to a long-lasting embrace of Black artists.
I hope that this is not just a trend because we have a lot to say.
There's institutions that need work. We are just as talented. It's like, don't give us anything, but if our talent speaks, allow us to be in these places.
Amber Strong, Newsy, Indianapolis.
Many thanks, Amber. We're jumping over from art and culture to a story about a family who's navigating the U.S. immigration system and working to determine the future of their citizenship. Welcome back, gang. When we talk about immigration reform, there's political activity. That's the congressional wrangling, negotiations, and all that other fun stuff. And then there's the personal impact. National correspondent Ben Shamiso has the story of a single mom and DACA recipient who has been in the U.S. for more than 15 years. But her pathway to citizenship hasn't been an easy one, which leaves her future with her son, who is a legal citizen, less than secure.
And dale.
When single mom Marlene Ortiz is not working her 2 jobs, she gives her 11-year-old son her undivided attention.
You tired? Nope.
On the soccer field.
Face me. You gotta face me.
At home on the couch.
Please marry me. Please be my wife.
And even on the floor.
What? That was you good.
The former FC Indiana soccer player will do anything to make sure her son achieves his dreams, but they could soon be forced to live in different countries. Ortiz's son was born in Indiana and is an American citizen, but she isn't.
My mom is the best mother I know. She's the loveliest mom that I love, and I love her so much.
When she was only 13, Ortiz traveled from Mexico to the US alone to flee poverty and gang violence and to reunite with her step-siblings in Indiana. Smugglers helped her cross the border illegally.
We did walk the desert for a lot of days. I think it was probably a week or 2.
Now 29, she's been shielded from deportation and allowed to work and drive in the US for nearly 10 years as a recipient of the Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA. But the Obama-era policy could soon die in court after a federal judge ruled in favor of 9 Republican-led states who said the program was illegal.
What would happen to you and your son if you get deported?
I will sacrifice him growing up for his security and for his well-being. I will never take him back with me.
I'm gonna be sad if they take her away.
Did good.
Ortiz has been living in this neighborhood in and around South Bend, Indiana for more than 15 years. This is the life that she built for herself. She calls it her American dream, not just for her, but also for her American child. But now their future hangs in the balance as Congress struggles to pass immigration reform.
Hold the line!
As Democrats finalize their large social spending bill, nearly 600,000 DACA recipients fear being left behind. Democrats want to pass the bill with a simple majority in the Senate through a process known as budget reconciliation. But rules limit what can be added. The Senate's rules referee has already rejected 2 attempts to include protections for millions of undocumented immigrants. Democrats are now pushing for a 3rd proposal, but Republicans argue it will encourage more people to immigrate illegally. Either way, Ortiz says she's seen this movie before.
In 2010, when I was delivering my son in the hospital, I was part of the movement, and the entire House of Representatives and the entire Senate, including the president, was a Democrat party. They did not pass the DREAM Act at that time.
Ortiz stresses it's not only the fate of DACA recipients that's at stake. Over 250,000 U.S. citizen children have a DACA parent, according to the Center for American Progress.
We are the mothers of U.S. citizens. We're friends of U.S. citizens. We're sisters of U.S. citizens.
After all these years in limbo, Ortiz says she has learned to live with the uncertainty. She tries not to obsess over her temporary status.
No, it's just a piece of paper.
A piece of paper that has kept her out of the shadows for nearly a decade, but perhaps for not much longer.
Here to talk with us a bit more about that story is Newsy immigration reporter Ben Chamiso, somebody who's been covering the nuances of immigration for years here. Benny, you got to touch on some of her story, but there were so many details left out, as per usual when we're doing this kind of work. Talk to us a bit more about her journey.
Well, Ortiz grew up in a very small town, a poor town in Mexico in the state of Jalisco, and she was brought up by a single mom who was struggling to pay rent and was also getting sick. Ortiz, who's only 13, thinks their ticket out of misery is their relatives in the US, but she also knew her mom would never risk taking her as a child along on a dangerous trip to the border, so Ortiz decided to run away on her own and trek alone to the border. Remember, she's 13-year-old. She's a girl going there on her own. First time around, she's arrested by a border patrol and tries one more time. The second time, she makes it through the desert, walking the desert for weeks with the help of smugglers. Once they make it to the US, the smugglers hold her hostage. And then take a look at what happens.
And I remember that they covered our eyes and they took us to a security house. There was a lot of people there, and there were people with big guns like this waiting for us. And as soon as I got there, somebody put a gun on my face and said, if you don't call your families and they don't pay within the next 24 hours, this is what's going to happen. Of course, I was a child, so I didn't know what to do. And they gave me a phone. I called my brother, and I told him that he had to pay a certain amount of money. He did pay the money. And then they dumped me at a Walmart facility in Texas.
So how exactly does her story compare to a lot of the issues that we are still seeing at the border today?
Well, she was an unaccompanied minor coming to the border. That wasn't very common 15 years ago when she did it. But this year, we saw that happen at an unprecedented rate. Hundreds of unaccompanied minors from Central America arriving at the border every day in hopes of getting reunited with a parent or a relative in the US. Now, because these children are from Central America, they usually give themselves up to Border Patrol and they're then allowed to seek protection in the US. That wasn't the case for Ortiz because she's from Mexico. So her goal was to avoid detection.
Yeah, one of the questions that I have, Benny, is, what happened to the mom in all of this? What happened to her?
Well, so the mom now lives as a US resident in Indiana next to Ortiz, next to the whole family. She was sponsored by her US citizen daughter, so it all worked out, except Ortiz is now the only undocumented person in her family. Her American stepsister, the same one who sponsored the mom, also trying to sponsor Ortiz, 17 years ago opened a case for her, but it still hasn't been processed, and it might not be processed for years.
Yeah, I know all of this is, really complicated, very complex stuff. The U.S. immigration system, I've learned from you that, it is very complex, but how exactly is that situation possible?
Well, the fact that the mom kind of was able to go faster than the daughter is because the U.S. prioritizes some family relationships over others, and siblings of U.S. citizens like Ortiz receive the lowest priority. Now, the second reason why she's been waiting for 17 years is because she's from Mexico, which is the country with the biggest wait for such green cards at the moment. If you look at the current wait time for cases like hers, the U.S. is processing cases for Mexican siblings of U.S. citizens that were filed in 1999. So that's more than 20 years ago. And it really makes you wonder, for people who have a legal route to stay in the U.S. thanks to a family member here, it can take that many years. It can take decades just to get your case reviewed. Helps you understand why so many people say our immigration system is broken, Christian.
Yeah, Ben Shamisa, Newsy immigration reporter. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben. So where do things currently stand on getting any sort of immigration reform passed in Congress? Basically, a lot is still in the air. There are a few proposals currently floating around that could be included in the social spending bill. One would focus on the backlog of green cards. Basically, unused green cards would be freed up for applicants that have been stuck on the waiting lists. People on the backlog could then pay higher fees to move up that line. This is something that could help someone like Marlon Ortiz, who we heard from. There's also a proposal buried in the Build Back Better plan, which would give undocumented immigrants who entered the U.S. before 2011 temporary protections and a work permit. That would impact as many as 7 million undocumented immigrants. Earlier this week, Newsy spoke to Representative Veronica Escobar about those proposals.
We know that immigrants fuel our economy. They are an important part of our GDP. They're an important part of our tax base. And many of these families are essential workers, or were essential workers, still are essential workers, people who were there for us during the darkest days of the pandemic. And never before have we seen polling as high as it is for offering legal pathways to residents in our country who've been part of our communities for many, many years. So we've got to deliver on this.
All that being said, these proposals first need to be approved by the parliamentarian who decides whether they can even be included in the spending bill, which brings me back to my original point. A lot is still up in the air. After the break, we're getting a preview of a new episode of Newsy's original documentary series, In Real Life. And this one features one of the people who helps make this show what it is on a daily basis. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome back, folks. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs says up to 1 in 5 veterans from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan deal with post-traumatic stress. That means feelings of anxiety, trouble sleeping, or just constantly feeling on edge. But a stigma around post-traumatic stress leaves many veterans reluctant to ask for help or seek treatment. Ahead of Veterans Day, Newsy's original documentary series, In Real Life, is following one veteran's experience dealing with PTSD and his hope of reducing that stigma for veterans seeking help. Newsy's own Joey Mayako shares his story in this clip from the episode. Check it out.
I left with 10 fingers and 10 toes and I came home with 10 fingers and 10 toes. So my definition of okay was the physical. My physical body is okay. I didn't have these crazy Hollywood blockbuster things that were happening to me. I went over there, I did my job, went on these missions and came home. 18 months after I got back, I had got an internship at a local news station. The end of the newscast would show soldiers that were killed in action. And this is where I started to crack. There was a photo of a guy I knew. He was killed in action, and immediately it's like all this flood of emotion, crazy panic attack. I stood up and I just told to my supervisor, I have to leave right now. I went to the store, bought a 12-pack, and, crushed it. I went to the VA and they diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of what they do is exposure therapy. And I did that for about 6 months. I had came back from Afghanistan and something was wrong. I'm not trying to lie about it anymore. I'm not trying to hide it anymore. I'm not trying to put it, shove it deep down. I need to do everything I can to just suck the poison out.
You just watched a clip from the upcoming episode of In Real Life featuring Joey Mayako, an editor for ITL and somebody who's been around since the very beginning. Joey is joining us here to tell us more about this wonderfully personal story and how it came about. First and foremost, Joey, thanks so much for making time from your usual duties of cutting together ITL to actually have a conversation on Zoom, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, CB. This is kind of full circle, but excited to be here.
Let's start with this. You had a procedure a few months back. How are you? How has the procedure been working out for you just in the time since?
Honestly, I've been good. I think a lot of the procedure really was when I got that, I was at a bit of a crossroads with just living with this for so long. It's helped reduce some of my anxiety, and it's really helped me start to look at post-traumatic stress through a different lens. So it doesn't have as much of a firm grasp on me, because that's what the last 15 to 18 years have just looked like. It's been this thing that, I've kept secret and I've just lived with. And this process has been about just unburdening myself of that. And I think there's other people that can relate to that story.
I'm curious to know, kind of in the course of this reporting, what is it that you learned about PTSD or learned about your own PTSD that you didn't know before? I mean, what were some of your takeaways there?
The biggest one for me was the thinking about PTSD as an injury and not a disorder. But for me, it was really just the that differentiation helped me look at it, in a new light. Before, I just thought it was this. I came back from Afghanistan. I'm like, this is just how I am now. When really, at least if you're able to kind of break it down, I went on missions, and when I went on missions, my fear got, ramped up, and that's what the body's made for, because you're alert, you're hyper vigilant. But then when you come home, it's hard to ramp that back down, and so that kept getting in the way of personal growth, and so that starts to build over time, and you start to see patterns in hindsight. To me, what's the exciting part is that, yes, although it might seem dark at times, especially given the current, the current statistics around this, there's a whole slew of people working to, get the right tools and the right modalities to, start to address the root problem, start to fix the injury, as opposed to just, putting a Band-Aid, which sometimes is what felt like from a disorder standpoint. Like, you're not really doing anything. You're kind of like kicking the can down the street.
Now that this piece is premiering, I mean, what is it that you're hoping people take away from the reporting that you've done here?
I think the biggest thing people should take away is, if you feel like you're trapped, know that there are options. There are so many options for really finding a way out. Part of the documentary talks about open-mindedness, and you might feel like you're trapped in the corner, but look over here, there might be a window, there might be a door. I came to a point where I needed to do the work. And that's really what, part of this is supposed to demonstrate, is like doing the work to really try and see yourself on the other side. Because when you're at the bottom of the mountain, it is not fun to look up.
Well, Joey, I can say that, we're glad that you decided to talk about this stuff, and I'm sure our audience is going to find this very valuable. Joey Mayako, he is the editor for ITL and also the host and producer of this upcoming episode of In Real Life. Joey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, TB.
Be sure to catch that full episode of In Real Life on Newsy this Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern or on your Newsy app anytime afterward. And don't forget, you can hit us up on the interwebs anytime by using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop on your platform of choice. Just not on MySpace. I haven't figured out my top 8 friends yet. Welcome back. We want to take the last couple of minutes we have with you to recap some of our top stories in a segment we like to call Closing the Loop. First, we showed you the latest in autonomous weapons technology and how close we might be to having to fend off so-called killer robots. Remember those robo-dogs that Boston Dynamics would make videos of, showing them doing klutzy things like trying to dance? Well, another company, Ghost Robotics, decided to build something similar, except this one has a gun mounted on top of it. The Ghost Robotics dog, called Spur, or Special Purpose Unmanned Rifle, is just the latest example of a trend in warfare that has seen more and more robotic technology being introduced, and that has some experts worried.
One of the biggest arguments for putting autonomy, and this is also one of the big arguments for on the loop when that gets brought up, is you want to have a machine that can fire fast enough to matter.
This is Kelsey D. Atherton, who authors Wars of Future Past on Substack. Kelsey has been covering these types of weapons for years.
The scariest possible scenario is you hook up an automatic targeting system to a nuclear early warning system.
The main issue here is the ethics of introducing these kinds of weapons into a country's military. The United States definitely isn't the only one working on these things. Then we talked to a recipient of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and while it's something that's been able to keep Marlon Ortiz in the country, there's still a lot of unknowns when it comes to her path to permanent citizenship.
What would happen to you and your son if you get deported?
I will sacrifice him growing up for his security and for his well-being. I will never take him back with me.
I'm gonna be sad if they take her away.
So where do things currently stand on getting any sort of immigration reform passed in Congress? Basically, a lot is still in the air. There are a few proposals currently floating around that could be included in the social spending bill. One would focus on the backlog of green cards. There's also a proposal buried in the Build Back Better plan, which would give undocumented immigrants who entered the US before 2011 temporary protections and a work permit. All that being said, these proposals first need to be approved by the parliamentarian who decides whether they can even be included in the spending bill. That's it for this episode of In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant, and as always, I appreciate an hour of your time or however long you tuned in, even if it may not have been undivided attention at times. Keep it right here on Newsy for more.